The lantern light caught the curve of her shoulder first, then the gentle rise and fall of her breathing beneath the scattered hay. Samuel Jacoby froze at the barn door, one hand still gripping the leather bridle he had come to retrieve, his heart hammering against his ribs like a startled horse. In all his 32 years working the ranch outside Wilson, Kansas, he had never found another soul sleeping in his hayloft, especially not a woman whose dark hair spilled across the golden straw like ink on parchment. It was late October in 1878, and the autumn wind whistled through the gaps in the barn walls, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. Samuel set down the bridle with careful movements, his boots silent on the packed earth floor as he climbed the ladder to the loft. She wore a dress that might have once been fine, but now bore the dust and wear of hard travel. Her face, peaceful in sleep, showed the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than a single night's rest could cure. A small carpetbag lay beside her, and her hands, even in sleep, clutched it close. Samuel cleared his throat gently. The woman's eyes flew open, dark and wide with terror, and she scrambled backward into the hay, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Easy now," Samuel said, holding up both hands. "I am not going to hurt you. This is my barn, is all, my ranch." The woman stared at him, her chest heaving, clearly weighing whether to believe him or run. In the lamplight, Samuel could see she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a delicate face made harder by whatever circumstances had brought her to sleep in a stranger's barn. "I am sorry," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "I will leave. I just needed somewhere safe for tonight. Just tonight, I promise." Samuel studied her for a long moment. There was no wedding ring on her finger, but there was a bruise on her wrist, half hidden by her sleeve. Her dress, though worn, had the cut of something expensive, and her speech carried education. A story lurked behind those frightened eyes, one that probably did not end well if she was sleeping in barns. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Margaret Pierce." "Well, Miss Pierce, I am Samuel Jacoby, and this is my land. Been working it for near 10 years now, since my father passed." He sat down on a bale of hay, keeping his distance, trying to appear as unthreatening as possible. "Now, I could let you stay just for tonight, like you asked. Or," he paused, watching her carefully, "you could stay longer, however long you need. Forever, even if it comes to that." Margaret blinked at him as if he had spoken in a foreign tongue. "You do not even know me. I know you are running from something or someone. I know you are tired and scared. I know you chose my barn because it looked solid and safe, which means you have good instincts." Samuel leaned forward slightly. "I also know that come morning, whatever you are running from will still be out there, and one night's rest will not be enough to face it." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I cannot ask that of a stranger. You are not asking. I am offering." Samuel stood and moved back toward the ladder. "The house is just across the yard. It has a spare room, a real bed, and a door that locks from the inside. You can clean up, get some proper rest. In the morning, if you want to tell me your story, I will listen. If you do not, that is fine too. But either way, you do not have to leave unless you want to." Margaret clutched her carpetbag tighter, her knuckles white. "Why would you do this?" Samuel paused at the top of the ladder, considering the question. His father had always said that a man was measured not by his cattle or his land, but by what he did when nobody was watching, when there was nothing to gain. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I have been alone out here long enough to know that sometimes people need help, and sometimes God puts them in your path for a reason." He climbed down the ladder and waited at the bottom. After a long moment, he heard the rustle of hay, and Margaret appeared at the top of the ladder, her carpetbag clutched in one hand. She climbed down with practiced movements, and Samuel noticed she moved like someone who had learned to be quick and quiet, someone used to leaving in a hurry. The wind had picked up by the time they crossed the yard to the house, a sturdy two-story structure his father had built with his own hands from Kansas limestone. Samuel opened the door and gestured for Margaret to enter. The interior was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and handmade furniture arranged practically throughout the main room. "The spare room is upstairs, first door on the right," Samuel said, lighting a lamp on the table. "There are clean sheets on the bed and water in the pitcher. I will be in the room at the end of the hall if you need anything." He paused, then added, "The front and back doors both lock from the inside. You are safe here, Miss Pierce. I give you my word." Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room as if cataloging escape routes. "Thank you, Mr. Jacoby. I do not know how to repay you. No repayment necessary." Samuel moved toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I have stew left from supper." "I am fine," Margaret said quickly, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Samuel smiled gently and ladled out a generous bowl of stew, setting it on the table along with fresh bread and butter. "Sit, eat, then get some rest. Everything else can wait until morning." Margaret sat down hesitantly, as if expecting the chair to disappear beneath her. She took a bite of the stew and then another, eating with the careful control of someone who had not had enough food in too long and did not want to appear desperate. Samuel busied himself at the stove, giving her privacy to eat without being watched. When she finally finished, Margaret stood and carried her bowl to the washing basin. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. Sleep well, Miss Pierce." Samuel listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the floorboards as she moved through the spare room, and finally the sound of the door closing softly. He sat down at the table with his own cup of coffee and stared into the dark liquid. He had not lied when he said he did not know why he had made such an offer to a complete stranger. There was something about her, beyond the obvious desperation, that called to something deep in his chest. Perhaps it was loneliness recognizing loneliness. Perhaps it was simply that he had needed someone to need him. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and Samuel sent up a silent prayer that whatever Margaret Pierce was running from would not find her here. Upstairs, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her carpetbag in her lap, trembling with exhaustion and relief and terror all mixed together. She had been running for 3 weeks, ever since she had escaped from Denver, where her uncle had tried to force her into marriage with a man twice her age, a business associate who had promised to settle her uncle's gambling debts in exchange for her hand. The man had been cruel even before the wedding, and Margaret had known that marriage to him would be a death sentence, if not of her body, then certainly of her soul. She had taken only what she could carry and slipped away in the night, boarding trains and stage coaches headed east, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid that her uncle or his men would catch up to her. She had run out of money 2 days ago in western Kansas and had been walking ever since, sleeping wherever she could find shelter, eating whatever she could afford or find. When she had seen the barn, solid and well-maintained, she had been unable to resist. Just one night, she had told herself. Just one night of real rest, and then she would figure out what to do next. She had never expected the rancher to find her, and she certainly had never expected him to offer her sanctuary. Margaret looked around the room, taking in the simple but sturdy furniture, the clean sheets, the curtains on the windows. Everything spoke of care and attention, of a man who took pride in his home even though he lived alone. She thought of Samuel Jacoby's face in the lamplight, weathered and strong, with kind eyes that had seen hard work but not hard living. He had not looked at her with suspicion or lust, only concern, Stay forever, he had said. As if it were that simple. As if she could just stop running and build a life here in the middle of Kansas with a stranger. The idea was absurd, impossible, and yet as Margaret finally lay down on the soft bed, pulling the clean quilt over her exhausted body, she let herself imagine it. Just for a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to stay, to be safe, to be home. She fell asleep with tears on her cheeks and hope, fragile and frightening, blooming in her chest. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up the stairs. Margaret woke slowly, confused by the softness of the mattress beneath her, the warmth of the quilt. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and panic seized her. Then memory returned, and she sat up, taking in the spare room in daylight. Everything looked just as it had the night before, solid and real and safe. She washed her face in the basin and did her best to make herself presentable, braiding her long, dark hair and smoothing the wrinkles from her dress. When she could delay no longer, she made her way downstairs. Samuel stood at the stove, his back to her, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He had clearly been up for hours, his shirt already bearing the dust of morning chores, his hair damp as if he had washed at the pump outside. "Good morning," Margaret said softly. Samuel turned, a smile creasing his tanned face. "Morning, Miss Pierce. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Margaret admitted. "Thank you. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." Samuel moved with efficient grace around the kitchen, setting out plates and utensils, pouring coffee, dishing up bacon and eggs and fried potatoes. "I have chores to finish after we eat, but I thought maybe you would like to see the ranch, get your bearings." Margaret sat at the table, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Mr. Jacoby, I need to tell you something." "Samuel, please, we are past formalities now, I think." "Samuel." Margaret wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I am not just traveling through. I am running. From my uncle, from a marriage he tried to force on me, from a life that would have destroyed me. If I stay here, even for a few days, I might bring trouble to your door." Samuel set down his own coffee and met her eyes. "Is this uncle of yours a violent man?" "Not personally, but he has money and connections. He hired men to look for me." "Well, those men will have a hard time finding you here. Wilson is not exactly a bustling metropolis, and folks here mind their own business. Plus," Samuel added with a slight smile, "I have been handling trouble on this ranch since I was 14 years old. I am not afraid of some hired thugs from Denver. You do not understand what you are offering." "Maybe not," Samuel agreed. "But I meant what I said last night. You can stay as long as you need to. If that is a few days, fine. If it is longer, that is fine too. And if you decide you want to make a life here, well, I would not object to the company." Margaret stared at him, this strange, generous man who offered everything and asked for nothing. "Why? You do not know me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse." Samuel considered this while he chewed a bite of bacon. "You could be," he acknowledged, "but I do not think you are. I think you are a woman who had the courage to run from something that would have broken her. That takes strength. That takes character. Those are qualities I admire." He paused. "And if I am wrong, well, I have a rifle and good instincts. I will take my chances." Despite everything, Margaret felt a smile tug at her lips. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably a bit of both," Samuel said cheerfully. "Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. Then, if you are up for it, I will show you around." The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of rolling prairie, with a creek running through the eastern portion and good grazing land dotted with cattle. Samuel walked Margaret through it all, pointing out the boundaries, the water sources, the best pastures. He introduced her to his two ranch hands, Tom and Charlie, who lived in a bunkhouse near the main barn and helped with the cattle and heavy work. Both men tipped their hats respectfully and asked no questions about Margaret's presence, though she saw curiosity in their eyes. Samuel showed her the chickens that needed feeding, the vegetable garden that was winding down for the season, the milk cow that needed tending twice a day. He spoke with pride about the ranch, about the work his father had put into building it, about his own hopes to expand the herd and maybe add some horses for breeding. Margaret listened and watched, seeing the ranch through his eyes. It was hard work, she could tell, the kind of work that required dedication and perseverance. But it was also beautiful, this life carved out of the prairie, this home built with care and sustained by determination. What do you think? Samuel asked as they stood on a low hill overlooking the creek, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. I think it is wonderful, Margaret said honestly. I think you should be very proud of what you have built here. My father built most of it. I am just trying to keep it going, make it better. Samuel glanced at her. There is always work to do on a ranch. If you decide to stay, even for a while, I would not expect you to just sit idle. But the work is good work, honest work. And you would have a home, a real home, for as long as you wanted it. Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes again. She had cried more in the last day than she had in the entire 3 weeks since leaving Denver. You really mean that? I really do. I do not understand why. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. When my father died, he said finally, I was 22 years old and completely alone. My mother had passed when I was a boy and I had no siblings, no family left. The neighboring ranchers, they could have taken advantage of that. They could have tried to buy me out cheap or steal my cattle or make my life difficult until I gave up. But they did not. They helped me. They taught me what I needed to know, helped me through the rough patches, treated me with respect even though I was just a kid. He turned to look at Margaret, his blue eyes serious. One of those ranchers, old Mr. Henderson, he told me something I never forgot. He said that we are all just trying to make it through this life, and the only way we do that is by helping each other. He said that kindness was not weakness, it was strength, because it took courage to trust, to be vulnerable, to offer help without knowing if you would be betrayed. Samuel shrugged. So when I found you in my barn last night, scared and alone and clearly in need of help, I thought about what Mr. Henderson said. I thought about the people who helped me when I needed it, and I knew what I had to do. Margaret wiped at her eyes. Your father raised a good man. He tried his best. Samuel smiled. So what do you say, Margaret Pierce? Will you stay, at least for a while? Margaret looked out over the ranch, at the rolling prairie and the distant hills, at this place that felt impossibly far from Denver and her uncle and the life she had fled. She thought about Samuel's offer, about the risk he was taking, about the possibility of something she had never had before. A home that was hers because someone wanted her there, not because she was useful or could be sold or traded. Yes, she said quietly, I will stay, at least for a while. Good, Samuel said, and his smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural to Margaret. She woke early, helped with breakfast, tended the chickens and the garden, learned to milk the cow with Samuel's patient instruction. In the afternoons, she often helped with mending or cleaning, or sometimes just sat on the porch with a book from Samuel's small library while he worked with the cattle. Evenings were spent around the dinner table, sharing meals and gradually, carefully, sharing stories. Margaret learned that Samuel had loved his father deeply, but found the work lonely sometimes. He had been engaged once, to a girl from town, but she had broken it off when she realized how isolated ranch life would be. He liked to read when he had time, preferred coffee to tea, and had a dry sense of humor that surprised Margaret with its timing. Samuel learned that Margaret had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a professor who had died when she was 18, leaving her in the care of his brother. Her uncle had been kind at first, but his gambling debts had grown, and his desperation had made him cruel. She loved music and had once played piano, though she had not touched one in years. She was good with numbers and had a sharp mind for organization, skills that had served her well in helping run her father's household before his death. They did not speak of the future beyond the immediate. Margaret did not mention leaving, and Samuel did not mention her staying forever, as he had that first night. It was as if they had reached an unspoken agreement to simply exist in the present, to let each day unfold without the weight of expectation. But something was growing between them, subtle as grass pushing through spring soil. Margaret found herself watching Samuel when he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the careful way he handled the animals, the quiet competence with which he managed everything. Samuel found himself listening for Margaret's footsteps in the morning, looking forward to her presence at meals, feeling the house come alive in ways it had not since his father passed. 3 weeks after Margaret arrived, the first snow came. It started as a gentle dusting, but by afternoon it had turned into a proper storm, wind driving the snow sideways across the prairie. Samuel and the ranch hands worked frantically to get the cattle into shelter and secure everything that could blow away. By the time Samuel made it back to the house, he was half frozen, his face red with cold, ice clinging to his coat. Margaret met him at the door with hot coffee and warm blankets, helping him peel off his frozen outer layers. "You are freezing," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Sit by the fire. I will heat more water for you to wash with." Samuel let her fuss over him, too cold to protest. He sat by the fire, sipping coffee, feeling warmth slowly seep back into his bones. Margaret brought him heated water and clean clothes, then disappeared into the kitchen to start supper, moving through his house as if she had lived there all her life. Later, after they had eaten and the storm continued to rage outside, they sat together by the fire, Margaret mending one of Samuel's shirts and Samuel working on the ranch accounts. The moment felt domestic and comfortable, and Samuel realized with a start that this was what he had always wanted. Not just a woman in his house, but this woman, with her quiet strength and sharp mind and gradual unfolding trust. "Margaret," he said, setting down his pencil. She looked up from her mending, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes, I have been thinking." Samuel hesitated, trying to find the right words. "You have been here almost a month now. You work hard, you pull your weight, and I value your company. But I realize that I have not asked you what you want. Do you plan to move on, or would you consider staying more permanently?" Margaret set down the mending, her hands trembling slightly. "What are you asking, Samuel?" "I am asking if you might consider making this your home, really your home, not just a temporary stop." He leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I have known you much longer. You fit here, Margaret. You fit on this ranch, in this house, in this life. And if I am being completely honest, you fit with me." Margaret's breath caught. "Samuel." "I am not asking you to marry me right this moment," Samuel said quickly. "I know that would be too fast, too much, but I am asking you to think about a future here, with me, as more than just a guest or a helper." He reached across the space between them and took her hand gently. "I care about you, Margaret, more than I probably should after such a short time, but I cannot help it. You are brave and kind and smart and beautiful, and when I think about you leaving, it feels like someone is squeezing my heart in their fist." Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I care about you too. I have been trying to protect myself in case this was not real, in case you changed your mind or my uncle found me or something went wrong. But I cannot help it either. You are the best man I have ever known, Samuel Jacoby. You are kind and generous and decent, and you make me feel safe in a way I have never felt before. Samuel squeezed her hand. So will you stay? Will you let this be your home? Yes, Margaret whispered. Yes, I will stay. I want to build a life here with you. Samuel stood and pulled her up with him, his arms coming around her in a careful embrace. Margaret melted into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. When he tilted her face up and kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Margaret kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and longing into it, feeling his arms tighten around her as if he would never let go. Outside, the storm howled, but inside, by the fire, two lonely people found something they had both been searching for: home. The winter passed in a blur of snowstorms and cozy evenings, of learning to work together and building something deeper than friendship but not yet defined. Samuel courted Margaret in small, thoughtful ways, bringing her wildflowers he found during the brief warm spells, reading to her by the fire, teaching her to ride one of the gentler horses. Margaret showed her feelings through actions, cooking his favorite meals, mending his clothes with careful stitches, organizing the ranch accounts in ways that made the operation more efficient. They held hands while walking through the snow-covered fields. They kissed by firelight when the house was quiet. They talked late into the night about their dreams and fears, building trust and intimacy word by word, touch by touch. In February, a stranger came to town asking questions about a young woman traveling alone. The sheriff, who had become friendly with Samuel over the years, rode out to the ranch to warn them. Margaret went pale when she heard the description the man had given, recognizing her uncle's detective. "He is getting close," she said, her voice shaking. "I should leave. I should go before he brings trouble to your door." "You are not going anywhere," Samuel said firmly. He looked at the sheriff. "What can we do?" The sheriff scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, the man was asking about a single woman traveling alone. Seems to me if Miss Pierce was married and settled, she would not fit that description anymore." Margaret and Samuel stared at each other, the implication hanging in the air between them. "Is that what you want?" Samuel asked quietly. "Or are you just doing it to hide?" Margaret took his hands in hers. "I want it because I love you," she said, the words finally spoken aloud for the first time. "I love you, Samuel. I have loved you for weeks now, maybe since that first night when you offered me forever without even knowing my name. If we marry, it will not be to hide from my uncle. It will be because I choose you, because I want to spend my life with you." Samuel's face broke into a wide smile. "I love you too, Margaret. I have wanted to say it but was afraid it was too soon, that I would scare you off." He turned to the sheriff. "How long do we have?" Man said he was staying at the hotel for a few days, asking around. "I would say you have maybe a week before he comes out this way, if he does at all." "Then we will be married by the end of the week," Samuel declared. He looked at Margaret. "If that is what you want." "It is what I want," Margaret said, her heart soaring, "more than anything." The wedding took place 5 days later in the small church in Wilson, with the sheriff and his wife standing as witnesses, and a handful of Samuel's friends from neighboring ranches in attendance. Margaret wore a simple blue dress that the sheriff's wife had helped her make over from fabric Samuel had bought in town. Samuel wore his Sunday best, his hair carefully combed, his hand steady as he slipped a simple gold band onto Margaret's finger. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Margaret with all the love and longing he had been holding back, and the small congregation cheered. They celebrated with a meal at the hotel, And then Samuel drove his new wife home to the ranch, to the house that was now truly theirs together. That night, they consummated their marriage in the upstairs bedroom that had been Samuel's alone for so long. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies with reverent touches and whispered endearments. Margaret gave herself to Samuel completely, holding nothing back, and Samuel worshipped her with every kiss, every caress, showing her with his body what his words had already declared: that she was cherished, that she was loved, that she was home. Afterward they lay tangled together in the sheets, Margaret's head on Samuel's chest, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair. "No regrets?" Samuel asked softly. "Not a single one," Margaret said. "You, only that I did not find you sooner." Margaret smiled against his skin. "You found me exactly when you were supposed to, when we both needed it most." 2 days later, the detective came to the ranch. Margaret saw him riding up from the window and felt her stomach clench with fear. But Samuel took her hand and led her out to the porch, standing tall and protective beside her. "Can I help you?" Samuel called out as the man dismounted. The detective was a thin man with cold eyes and a calculating expression. "I am looking for a woman named Margaret Pierce. I was told she might be in this area." "There is no one by that name here," Samuel said evenly. "This is my wife, Margaret Jacoby." He emphasized the last name. "We were married last week." The detective's eyes narrowed as he studied Margaret. "You look a lot like the woman I am searching for." "I imagine many women look similar," Margaret said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I have been living in Kansas for over a year now, working as a teacher in Wilson before I married Samuel. You are welcome to check with the sheriff or the schoolhouse." It was a lie, but it was delivered with such calm confidence that the detective hesitated. Samuel had already spoken with the sheriff and several townspeople, who had agreed to back up the story if needed. In a small community like Wilson, people protected their own, and Margaret was one of them now. "I see," the detective said slowly. "And you have papers to prove your marriage, filed with the county clerk," Samuel said. "You are welcome to check there as well." The detective stared at them for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if it was worth pursuing further. Finally, he mounted his horse. "I will do that," he said. "If I find out you are lying, I will be back." "You will find everything in order," Samuel said calmly. They watched the detective ride away, and Margaret released a breath she had not known she was holding. "Do you think he believed us?" "I think he will check with the county clerk, find our marriage certificate, and decide that his employer does not pay him enough to pursue a married woman with a husband who looks willing to defend her." Samuel pulled Margaret into his arms. "You are safe now. You are my wife, and no one is taking you away from me." Margaret buried her face in his chest, feeling the last knot of fear loosen in her stomach. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. "Forever." The detective did not return. Whether he believed their story or simply decided Margaret was not worth the trouble, they never knew. But as the weeks passed with no further sign of him or anyone else from her uncle, Margaret began to truly believe that she was free, that the past could not reach her here. Spring came to the Kansas prairie with an explosion of wildflowers and new grass, and the ranch burst into activity. Margaret threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, learning everything Samuel could teach her about cattle and horses and land management. She proved to have a natural aptitude for the business side of ranching, taking over the accounts completely and finding ways to stretch their income further and save for future investments. She also proved to have a gift for handling horses. Samuel started her on the gentler mares, but soon realized that Margaret had an intuitive understanding of the animals, a quiet confidence that they responded to. By midsummer, she was riding as well as he was, helping move cattle and check fences alongside him. They worked side by side through the long summer days, building not just a ranch but a partnership. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and red, talking about their plans for the future, about expanding the herd, about maybe starting a horse breeding program. In late August, Margaret realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, and then told Samuel over breakfast one morning, her hands shaking slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "I think I am with child," she said softly. Samuel's fork clattered to his plate. "Are you sure?" "Fairly certain. I have been feeling ill in the mornings, and I am late by almost 3 weeks now." Samuel was around the table in an instant, pulling Margaret out of her chair and into his arms. "That is wonderful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That is the most wonderful news." Margaret laughed, relief washing through her. "You are happy." "Happy, Margaret, I am over the moon." Samuel pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "A baby, our baby, a child to carry on the ranch, to fill this house with laughter and noise and life." "It might be a girl," Margaret warned. "I do not care if we have a dozen girls. Each one will be as loved as the last." Samuel kissed her deeply. "You have given me everything, Margaret. A home, a partnership, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Margaret continued to work on the ranch as much as she could, though Samuel became increasingly protective as her belly swelled. By February, she was large and uncomfortable, and Samuel barely let her do more than light housework, insisting she rest and take care of herself and the baby. On a cold night in early March of 1879, Margaret went into labor. Samuel sent Charlie racing into town for the doctor and the midwife, while he stayed with Margaret, holding her hand through the contractions, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement and love. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Samuel never left her side, even when the midwife tried to shoo him out. He held Margaret's hand through every contraction, every push, every moment of pain and exhaustion. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, a baby's cry filled the room. The midwife cleaned and wrapped the infant, then placed the baby in Margaret's arms. "A boy," she said with a smile. "A healthy baby boy." Margaret looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt love crash over her like a wave. Samuel leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears, one finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Margaret asked. Samuel thought for a moment. "James, after your father, James Samuel Jacoby." Margaret looked up at her husband, this good man who had given her everything, who had taken her in when she had nothing, who had loved her without reservation. "James Samuel Jacoby," she repeated. "It is perfect." The years that followed were full and rich and challenging in the way that building a life always is. James grew from infant to toddler to young boy, a sturdy child with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. He followed Samuel around the ranch from the time he could walk, learning the work, absorbing everything his father could teach him. 2 years after James was born, Margaret delivered a daughter they named Sarah. 3 years after that came another son, Thomas. The house that had once seemed too large for one lonely man now burst with life and noise, and the chaos of children. Margaret and Samuel worked together to expand the ranch, adding horses to their cattle operation. Margaret's instinct for horses proved invaluable, and soon they had a reputation throughout Kansas for breeding quality mounts. The ranch prospered, and with prosperity came security and comfort. though they never forgot the hard work that had built it all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Margaret back to the barn where he had first found her, where this whole improbable story had begun. The barn had been rebuilt and expanded to accommodate their growing operation, but the loft was still there, still filled with hay. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it happened," Margaret said, standing in the doorway, looking up at the loft. "That I was desperate enough to sleep in a stranger's barn, and that the stranger turned out to be you." "I thank God for it every day," Samuel said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "That night changed my life. You changed my life." Margaret turned in his arms to face him. "You saved mine. If you had turned me away, if you had not offered me forever in that moment, I do not know what would have become of me." "You would have survived," Samuel said confidently. "You are the strongest person I know, Margaret. You would have found a way." "Maybe," Margaret allowed. "But I am so glad I did not have to. I am so glad I found you, that you found me, that we built this life together." She kissed him softly. "I love you, Samuel Jacoby, more today than 10 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." "Stay forever," Samuel murmured against her lips, echoing his words from that first night. "Forever," Margaret promised. They stood there in the barn, wrapped in each other's arms, while outside the sun set over the prairie they had tamed together, over the ranch they had built, over the life they had created from nothing but determination and love, and one reckless moment of kindness. The children grew and thrived. James took to ranching like he had been born to it, working alongside his father from dawn to dusk, learning everything Samuel could teach him about land and cattle and horses. Sarah was quieter, more bookish like her mother, but she had a gift for numbers and organization that made her invaluable in managing the business side of the ranch. Thomas was the adventurer, always getting into mischief, always pushing boundaries, but his charm and intelligence got him out of as much trouble as they got him into. Margaret watched her children grow with pride and wonder. She taught them to read and write, instilled in them the importance of kindness and integrity, told them stories about their grandfather, the professor, and their father's parents, who had built the ranch from nothing. She did not speak much about her own past, about her uncle or her flight from Denver. But as the children grew older, she told them enough that they understood the courage it had taken for her to run, and the risk their father had taken in sheltering her. "You are lucky," James said once when he was 15 after hearing the story again, "that you found each other." "Luck had something to do with it," Margaret agreed, "but so did choice. Your father chose to be kind when he could have been suspicious. I chose to trust when I could have run. Every day since then, we have both chosen each other, chosen this life, chosen to work hard and love harder. That is what makes a marriage last, James. Not luck, but choice." Samuel, overhearing from across the room, caught Margaret's eye and smiled. She smiled back, the look passing between them full of shared history and private jokes and deep, abiding love. After 15 years of marriage, they still fell into bed together with passion and tenderness, still talked late into the night about their hopes and dreams, still found in each other everything they needed. In the summer of 1891, 13 years after that first night in the barn, tragedy struck the region. A drought gripped the prairie, withering crops and drying up water sources. Many ranchers struggled and some went under completely, forced to sell their land and move on. The Jacoby ranch survived, but only through careful management, hard work, and the financial cushion they had built up during the good years. Samuel drove himself hard that summer, working from before dawn until long after dark, doing everything he could to keep the cattle alive and the ranch solvent. Margaret worked beside him, while also keeping the household running and the children fed and educated. It was exhausting and stressful, and more than once they wondered if they would make it through. But they did. When the drought finally broke in September and the rains came, the Jacoby ranch was still standing, battered but unbroken. Samuel collapsed into bed that first night of rain, so exhausted he could barely move, and Margaret held him while the storm raged outside. "We made it," she whispered. "We survived." "We always do," Samuel said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Together we can survive anything." It was true. They had survived Margaret's past catching up with her, the challenges of pregnancy and childbirth, the difficulties of raising children, the harsh Kansas weather, drought and hardship. They had survived it all because they faced it together, because they chose each other every day, because their love was built on a foundation of respect and partnership and genuine affection. The children grew up and eventually began making their own ways in the world. James stayed on the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Samuel grew older. He married a girl from town, a teacher named Elizabeth, and they built a small house on the eastern portion of the property. Sarah went to study teaching at a college in Kansas City, determined to bring education to rural children. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, headed west to try his hand at silver mining in Colorado, promising to write regularly. As their children left to build their own lives, Margaret and Samuel found themselves alone together again, the house quiet in ways it had not been for 20 years. But it was a comfortable quiet, full of companionship and shared contentment. "You miss them?" Samuel asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Every day," Margaret admitted. "But I am also proud of them, of the people they have become. We raised them well, Samuel." "We did," Samuel agreed. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the gold band that had sat on her finger for over 20 years now. "Do you ever regret it, staying here building this life?" "Never," Margaret said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted, Samuel. A home, a family, a purpose, a partnership. You gave me yourself, and that has been more than enough." Samuel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am the one who was given a gift." A frightened woman sleeping in my barn turned out to be the answer to prayers I had not even known I was praying. "You made my life complete, Margaret." They sat together as the light faded from the sky, holding hands, comfortable in the silence that only comes from decades of knowing and loving someone. Around them, the ranch hummed with life, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the corrals, the wind rustling through the grass. It was the sound of home, of a life well built, of a legacy that would outlast them both. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel's hair turned gray, then white. Margaret found silver threading through her dark locks. Their bodies aged and slowed, but their love remained constant, steady as the prairie itself. James and Elizabeth gave them grandchildren, 4 in total, who filled the house with laughter and energy during visits. Samuel taught them to ride and rope, just as he had taught their father. Margaret read to them and taught them sums, delighted to pass on knowledge to another generation. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. All 3 of their children came, along with spouses and grandchildren. They roasted a steer and made dozens of pies, and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of the Wilson community. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Samuel stood and called for everyone's attention. "I want to say something," he announced, pulling Margaret to her feet beside him. 30 years ago, I found this woman sleeping in my barn. She asked to stay just for the night, and I told her to stay forever." He looked down at Margaret, his blue eyes still bright despite his years. "Best decision I ever made. Margaret, you have been my partner, my lover, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Thank you for choosing to stay, for building this life with me, for giving me more than I ever dreamed possible. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for seeing past the frightened woman in your barn to who I could become. Thank you for giving me a home when I had none, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for standing beside me through everything. You are the best man I have ever known, Samuel Jacoby, and loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. They kissed while their family cheered, and if the kiss was gentler than it had been 30 years before, it was no less full of love and commitment and absolute devotion. Samuel died peacefully in his sleep in 1905 at the age of 60 with Margaret lying beside him. She woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, one hand still holding hers. She sat with him for a long time, memorizing his features, saying goodbye to the man who had changed her life with a single act of kindness 27 years before. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Kansas. Samuel had been respected and loved, known for his fairness, his generosity, his willingness to help neighbors in need. Story after story was told of times Samuel had offered aid, had given advice, had simply shown up when someone needed him. Margaret listened and realized that what Samuel had done for her that night in the barn was not unique. It was simply who he was, a man who saw a need and met it, who offered kindness without expectation of return, who believed in helping others. Margaret lived another 12 years after Samuel's death, staying on the ranch that James now ran, helping where she could, spending time with her grandchildren and eventually her great-grandchildren. She never remarried, though she had offers. Samuel had been her great love, and she had no interest in replacing him. She died in 1917 at the age of 64, on a warm spring day much like the one when she had first arrived in Kansas all those years ago. Her last words, spoken to James as he sat beside her bed, were simple. "Tell them I stayed forever," just like he asked. James buried his mother beside his father on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree they had planted together the first spring after their marriage. The headstones were simple but elegant, bearing their names, dates, and a single inscription that told their whole story. She asked for just tonight. He said stay forever. She did. The Jacoby Ranch continued to thrive under James's management and was eventually passed down to his own children. The house where Samuel and Margaret had built their life was preserved and expanded, each generation adding to it while maintaining the core structure that Samuel's father had built over a century before. The story of how Samuel and Margaret met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It became a touchstone, a reminder of the power of kindness, of the courage it takes to trust, of the way a single moment can change the trajectory of an entire life. Years later, one of Margaret's great-great-granddaughters, doing research for a school project, found Margaret's carpet bag in the attic, carefully preserved all these years. Inside were a few articles of clothing, some letters from Margaret's father, and a small journal. The journal entries were sparse, documenting Margaret's flight from Denver, her fear and exhaustion, her growing desperation. The last entry before a gap of several weeks read, "I can go no further. I found a barn that looks solid. I will sleep there just for tonight and pray that tomorrow brings some answer, some way forward." The next entry, written in a shakier hand, clearly emotional. "I asked to stay just tonight. He said to stay forever. I think I might do exactly that." His name is Samuel Jacoby, and he may have just saved my life. The entries after that documented Margaret's growing love for Samuel, her wonder at finding home in such an unexpected place, her gratitude and joy and amazement at the life they were building together. The final entry, written shortly before her wedding, read, "Tomorrow I become Margaret Jacoby. I came to Kansas running from one man who would have destroyed me, and I found another who has rebuilt me. Samuel does not know it yet, but I will love him until the day I die. He offered me forever, and I am taking it." The great-great-granddaughter shared the journal with her family, and they all gathered to read Margaret's words, to glimpse into the heart of the woman whose courage and Samuel's kindness had started it all. They were reminded of why their family valued generosity and compassion, why they believed in helping those in need, why they held fast to the idea that kindness was never wasted. The Jacoby Ranch still stands today, over a century after Samuel found Margaret in his barn. The land has seen droughts and floods, wars and depressions, countless changes in the world around it. But the core values that Samuel and Margaret built their lives on remain embedded in the very soil. Hard work, integrity, compassion, and the belief that when someone needs help, you offer it without counting the cost. The barn where it all began was eventually torn down to make way for modern facilities, but the spot where it stood is marked with a plaque telling the story of how Samuel Jacoby found Margaret Pierce sleeping in his hay, how she asked for just one night, how he offered her forever, and how that moment created a legacy that has lasted for generations. Their love story became part of Kansas history, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even in the wildest places, love can bloom. That sometimes the greatest adventures start with the smallest acts of kindness. That home is not always where you start, but where someone sees you, truly sees you, and says, "Stay." Margaret had fled to Kansas looking for safety, for one night's rest in a dangerous world. What she found instead was a man with kind eyes and an open heart, a ranch that needed her as much as she needed it, and a love that would sustain her through decades of joy and hardship. She had asked for just tonight, expecting nothing more than temporary shelter. Samuel had offered her forever, and somehow, miraculously, that is exactly what they built. Their story proves that the best things in life often come when we least expect them, that sometimes running away leads us exactly where we need to be, that love does not always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes love is as simple as a man finding a stranger in his barn and saying, "You do not have to leave unless you want to." Sometimes love is choosing to trust when everything tells you to run. Sometimes love is working side by side through drought and hardship, raising children, building a life one day at a time. Samuel and Margaret's forever was not perfect. They faced challenges and hardships, disappointments and losses. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. Their love was not the stuff of fairy tales, all magic and ease. It was better than that. It was real, built on respect and partnership, sustained by choice and commitment, deepened by time and experience. When Margaret first ran from Denver, she thought she was leaving everything behind. She had no way of knowing she was actually running toward something. Toward home, toward love, toward a life richer than anything she had imagined. She had no way of knowing that the worst night of her life, cold and desperate and alone in a strange barn, was actually the beginning of everything good that would come after. Samuel had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it was like to hope for more. He had accepted his solitary life, made peace with the likelihood that he would grow old and die on the ranch without ever finding a partner. And then he had climbed into his barn loft and found a dark-haired woman sleeping in the hay, and everything changed. They had both been saved that night in their own ways. Margaret had been saved from immediate danger, from the men chasing her, from a future that would have destroyed her. Samuel had been saved from loneliness, from a half-lived life, from growing bitter and isolated. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and enduring. Their story reminds us that we never know when life will change, when the person we are meant to be with will appear, when home will find us instead of us finding it. It reminds us to be kind to strangers, because we never know what burdens they carry or what gifts they might bring into our lives. It reminds us that love is a verb, an action, a choice we make every day to see and value and support another person. Most of all, their story reminds us that forever is not a fantasy. It is something built day by day, choice by choice, through all the mundane moments and extraordinary challenges that make up a life. Forever is getting up before dawn to do chores together. Forever is holding hands through childbirth. Forever is surviving drought and raising children and growing old side by side. Forever is finding someone who says, "Stay," and choosing to do exactly that, every single day. Margaret Pierce came to Samuel Jacoby's barn asking for just one night. Samuel Jacoby told her to stay forever. She did, and in doing so, they both discovered that forever is not too long when you spend it with the right person. Their love became a legacy. Their choices shaped a family, and their story proved that sometimes the best things in life really do start in the most unexpected places. In the end, that is what their forever looked like. A ranch in Kansas, children and grandchildren, a life of hard work and deep love, and two people who chose each other every day until death parted them. It was everything they needed. It was more than enough. It was perfect.